welcome to a live, in-person Scholar Gypsies podcast. I suppose nominally speaking, today's events centre around the upcoming European elections and two candidates seeking to be members of the next European Parliament. Una McGurk, barrister and senior counsel, stands in Ireland South, and John Waters, journalist and author, stands in Midlands Northwest. Hopefully, though, we'll dive a little deeper than talk of mere elections and campaigns as the conversation develops throughout the afternoon. This country has huge problems ahead of it, and one's in need of people willing to tackle them with all the tenacity and skill they possess, whether in politics or outside of politics. These are times for the best of us as people, I believe. The best of us creatively, the best of us intellectually, the best of us spiritually, and the best that our hearts can give. And today we have two candidates who I believe satisfied those criteria. The rapidly raging seas of a fast-changing world demands nothing less of us than our best, because nothing less will do to get us out of some of the situations we've got ourselves into over the last 4 years, and perhaps even longer than that. Both John and Una, I believe, are cut from our finest cloth and have qualities that represent the very best of who we are as a people. If our politics is to have a hopeful future, it must attract more people of the calibre of John Waters and Una McGurk. In a little under 4 weeks, hundreds and hundreds of election candidates will be asking us for the same commodity. Not simply a vote, but for something more. They'll be asking for a little of our collective power. Over the last 4 years, in particular, we've all seen how the acquisition of this power has destroyed our political class and state in a most stunning and spectacular fashion. So for me, before questions regarding the political issues and policy agendas of candidates should be addressed and answered, we must ask the more fundamental questions. Can the people asking for the power handle the power if we bestow it on them? What will power do to them, and how quickly will it do it? Luckily, in John and Una's case, I'm more than a little hopeful. Both have suffered professionally and personally for having a most unusual quality: the courage of their convictions. And I'm sure we might touch on some of these later. Both have shown an ability to speak truth to power, and they withstood the onslaughts while managing to keep inching forward. A good sign, I think. Both are reluctant candidates, an even better sign, I believe. For often the most eager to acquire power are the very first to be swallowed whole by the dark majesty of it. I want to finish by thanking you all for joining us here today to sit and listen to what John and Una have to say about their candidacies. And I'd ask you now to give them both a warm welcome and a round of applause as Una McGurk joins me on stage.
Thank you, Jerry O'Neill, for that profound and very gracious introduction. Thank you so much. So hello everyone, it's lovely to see so many of you. Thank you very much for being here. So my name is Una McGurk. Can you hear me all right? Yep. I was born in a little village called Ballyjamestuff, which is in County Cavan, a long, long time ago. And my parents, Tom and Ethel, who settled there and remained there until such time as they went to their heavenly reward. My father was a brilliant and natural entrepreneur, a builder, a businessman, a farmer. And my mother, a former teacher, joined him using her exceptional accounting skills, where they worked extremely hard to create and develop their successful family business, whilst caring deeply for their community and their neighbours. I grew up as the eldest of 6 and went to college and studied history and psychology. and became a barrister, a very unusual profession for a woman at that time. But I did so because of my passion for truth and justice, and at the time it seemed to be an appropriate outlet. I practiced in a variety of disciplines, including criminal law, working mainly on the Northern Circuit, and was the first female state prosecutor appointed by the Director of Public Prosecutions, which was for the county of Donegal. I sat on and chaired a number of quasi-judicial tribunals in the area of employment law, refugee law, hepatitis C compensation, and mental health law. I was a government appointee to a number of forums, for example, the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation and the Forum for Europe. And I am a former national chairperson of the Irish Society of the Red Cross, and I was the youngest chairperson in the world at that time. I am an accredited mediator and also have a number of qualifications in transpersonal and healing modalities. And I have an executive master's in the area of international relations and diplomacy. I am currently in the process of writing and publishing a book on an aspect of international relations, both historical and very relevant to the times that we live in now, which will be released hopefully in the next few months. So that's just to give you a flavour of my skill set and experience. In 2020, when the strong arm of globalism showed itself once more with the declared COVID pandemic, leaning on my beloved country with its captured government, I, like many others here today, spoke truth to power and called out this government overreach. With no other platform available, I discovered YouTube and made a few videos. I was then invited to speak at a public rally in Dublin in August of 2020, where I exposed the flawed PCR test which was being used to justify the lockdowns, and the lack of scientific data to substantiate the mandatory wearing of masks. This is where the fun began, except it was not so funny at the time. I was hounded by the legacy media. Government ministers and other political spokespersons were publicly tweeting to condemn my behaviour, and I was vilified, defamed, and ultimately cancelled, losing my career and income in the process. It was in reality, though, just a harsh reminder that I was on the right path and over the target. I was, of course, proven to be correct. Lockdowns did not work and caused more harm than good. The PCR test is flawed and never should have been used. And not only did mask wearing not work, but in many cases caused harm. So why did I do what I did? And why have I now declared myself as a candidate to run for a position as a member of the European Parliament? I did it for my parents, my grandparents, my grandfather who was a prisoner in the Argent in Belfast Lough. I did it for my ancestors who suffered poverty and degradation but survived, so that their children and their children's children could have a better life. So having attained that better life, what are we going to do with it? Because mere consumers become mere consumers and lie asleep under a different yoke? Or do we keep working to halt the tide of oppression with which we are being continuously bombarded as an indigenous peoples who deserve protection from our government, who deserve protection under the UN Charter, instead of what we have now, which is an imposed agenda of woke ideology and diversity, which is designed to destroy us? For me, it was always the latter. Our children's future depends upon it. Thank you. In Europe, I pledge to you, the people of Ireland South, to work to retain our right to freedom of expression, without which democracy withers. In Europe, I will work to expose the real causes and agendas behind mass immigration, which is neither organic nor natural. In Europe, I will work to protect the Irish people from losing any more of their individual or national sovereignty. In Europe, I will work to protect the Irish people from the effects of the proposed WHO pandemic treaty and the amended international health regulations. In Europe, I will work to support Irish farmers and any and all attempts to drive them from their lands. In particular, I will do everything in my power to stop this pseudo-nature restoration law disaster, which is coming down the line and is being supported by all our current MEPs. I will support diversification for fishermen into other marine activities, such as seaweed harvesting, for which there is a worldwide phenomenal demand, and work to provide funding programs which are already available for those fishing communities decimated by fishing quota bans. In Europe, I will be your guardian at the gate to keep you informed of all agendas, policies and legislative measures that are coming your way and that will impact you and your families. In Europe, I will stand strong and firm and fight so that truth and justice will be spoken and revealed at all times. And I will work with others, hopefully one of those others will be John Waters, to impose that and to ensure it. In Europe, I will use my right to vote against any measure which is not for the benefit of my country or the people of my country, and in particular, my constituents in Ireland South. I am beholden to no party, and I am beholden to no whip. In Europe, I will use my platform to use my skills to negotiate, to mediate, to lobby for whatever is good that is left of it, that will be of benefit to the people of Ireland. In Europe, I will use my voice to be your voice. And that, my friends, makes me not only a worthy candidate, but it makes me the best candidate for Ireland South. Vote number 1, Una on June the 7th.
Thank you very much. My name is John Waters. The last thing on earth I want to be is a politician. I do not need a political career. But I am determined to win this election, to win a seat in this election. For various reasons, I believe that we are at a unique moment, certainly in my lifetime, but perhaps in the lifetime of our nation, a moment unprecedented, of terminal danger, I believe, for our nation. And I believe that we, the people, have to step in now. Something has happened to our political system that is really cancerous and has turned against the body politic, the body of our nation. I come from a family that was extremely anti-European Union from the very beginning. I drove around with my father on the 1st of January 1973, the day we joined it, and he drove a mail car around County Roscommon, and he carried passengers, and all of the conversations that day, I'll never forget it, were about this, and my father's warning that we were headed for a totalitarian future. And I was a skeptic about my father's skepticism, but he was right, and I was wrong. And I want to go in there now and speak with my voice and his voice and your voice to tell those people that their time is up. I was a journalist for nearly 40 years in Ireland, and I wrote about many things. I always seemed to end up on the losing side of arguments, but I didn't mind that because the arguments were good and necessary. I believed above all else that our democracy requires conversation, requires to be able to speak to itself. It's ironically rather different for a collective society, a people, than for an individual. An individual, in order to speak intelligently, needs to read and learn, and first of all read and learn and form themselves and become articulate on the issues. But a society needs to start with speaking speaking is the most important thing. And this has been attacked in our culture in the last decade in particular, dozen years. This most fundamental requisite of freedom, of democracy, has been staunched. Our right to speak our truth and the facts that we know to be true. And this really bothers me as a journalist of so long. When I was in the Irish Times, if you read my articles going back to 1990, you will notice, I think, a pattern in them, which has become more and more acute in my mind for the last few years, because there were three themes which I would say account for about 70 to 80% of my output. And those three themes were family, nation, and transcendence. And those are the three areas that are most under attack now in our nation. So there seems to be some kind of karma or harmony or resonance operating in my life, requiring me now to follow the paths that I was on, that was interrupted. I was almost cancelled, and then I decided to self-cancel. My role in the media no longer was relevant to the state of my nation, to the capacity of my nation to speak. The very best I was then there was a token contrarian, and somebody who, in a certain sense, provided a gracing aspect to the undemocratic nature of what was happening, because the entire thing was commandeered and propagandized and was being used as an instrument of brainwashing. And my presence there, albeit deeply unpopular with the authorities of the media and all of my colleagues, my presence there nevertheless allowed them to say, well, we are democratic because we've got this idiot. Well, now I find myself finally understanding what that was all about, because I was cast out into, at first, what I thought was the wilderness, but it wasn't the wilderness. It was the arms of my people, who now we gather on the periphery and we look over the wall at our nation. And we have this moment when we have an opportunity to return and reclaim it at the very centre. And this is precisely why I have decided to run, and run for the European Parliament of all things, because there, I believe, ironically, I can go there and speak from there, from that certain height, back into my nation, back into my people, so that we may ignite a fire here, a fire of truth. I believe that back 12 years ago there was in effect a coup in Ireland. I believe that forces that we cannot yet see, but which are undeniably present by the changes we can see in our culture, that they have been operating within our culture in a very malevolent way for a very long time. 4 years ago, I woke up one morning and realized that things were moving much faster than even I had begun to suspect, because it seemed that out there some change had happened. And I thought, how long have I been asleep? Because when I've been asleep, it seems that people in general have come to agree that, democracy is a bit of a luxury, and freedom is not something particularly desirable. It's really a far-right obsession. And I was completely baffled by that. And I was even more baffled by the fact that nobody else seemed to be baffled. Everybody else seemed to think this was perfectly run-of-the-mill. There's a flu out there, so we can't possibly be concerned with freedom. And myself and Jim O'Doherty went to the High Court seeking to make this argument, and spent 2.5 years battling at multiple levels of the court system on a case which we were told had no content. And nevertheless, it took, in the end, 13 judges, 30 hours of court hearing, 10 hearings, several rainforests in order to dispense of this contentless case. So I came back then, and for the last 4 years I have been struggling, tying my brain in knots, trying to find words and sentences to describe what has happened to us, and what it means, and how it could possibly have happened at the end of my life, a life in which I took so many things for granted. that albeit that I was always in disagreement with lots of mainstream views, nevertheless there seemed to be a willingness to listen and to argue and to, shake hands afterwards and maybe have a drink together. That seemed to have evaporated. And now here I was in this situation where I was being, and I don't even mind being personally a pariah. That's not the point. It is the very idea that you could become a pariah for simply having a different opinion in your own country, the country that you would love from birth. And so all of these things really gathered together in my mind and made me think something must be done. I mean, I looked at the demeanours and the faces of the politicians whom we had elected, and it was like they had understood from the change that had happened that they were no longer actually representatives of the people, that they had acquired a role which is something closer to bailiff. The way they would look at people, the way they would speak to their own people, the way they would say, well, we are consulting you, but that doesn't mean we're going to listen to what you say. Well, I remember the word consulting when it meant that we were going to find out what you thought and take it to heart. But no, something had changed fundamentally, and I know what it is. To some indeterminate point, sometime between the summer of 2019 and the spring of 2020, it was as if the power pack that was driving our societies, in the West particularly, that power that came from the people, that somebody had snuck over in the middle of the night and plugged it out and plugged in a different one. And this power pack came from the very top of the mountain, where the richest and the most elite, supposed by their own definition, resided. And now they were telling us what would happen. And all the civil libertarians and all the journalists and all the left-wing politicians and all the right-wing politicians and all the priests and all the scientists, they all agreed that this change was actually quite fine. But I did not. I said no. And that no has defined my existence for the past 4 years. And that is what I'm taking to Brussels. Not just one no, but many no's. No, 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 not on your Nelly.